to our allies, step up, get our air bases out of Spain. They're not reliable. Move all those airplanes to a country that would let us use them when we're threatened by a regime like Iran. To our friends in Spain, man, you have lost your way. I don't want to do business with you anymore. I want our air bases out of Spain into a country that will let us use them. To our Arab friends, I've tried to help you construct a new Mideast. You need to up your game here. I can't go to South Carolina and say, we're fighting and you won't publicly fight. What you're doing behind the scenes, that has to stop. The double dealing of the Arab world when it comes to this stuff needs to end. I go back to South Carolina. I'm asking them to send their sons and daughters over to the Mideast. What I want you to do in the Mideast, to our friends in Saudi Arabia and other places, step forward and say, this is my fight too. I join America. I'm publicly involved in bringing this regime down. If you don't, you're making a great mistake and you're going to cut off the ability to have a better relationship with the United States. I say this as a friend.
Welcome, Kate Daly Show. Yeah, that was good old Lindsay. Good old Lindsay. Little Mr. Closeted Lindsay. Oh, did I say that out loud? Sorry. Alleged. Just send your sons and daughters. Just don't worry about what we're doing. We weren't attacked or anything, but just go fight for freedom. Just go fight for freedom. You're good. Okay. Well, we have a lot to discuss today. So, I dealt with a migraine for about 24 hours and it was not fun yesterday. So I'm apologizing about yesterday. And Melissa and Susan will be back next week. Also, did I mention Ron Paul will be on the show? Not next week, but the following week. So it'll be interesting to get his insights. Again, as we're talking about Iran again, because, I've actually, let's see, he's been on the show. Ron Paul's been on the show probably, 6 or 7 times. And it seems like Iran always comes up. And when we're talking foreign policy, it's kind of interesting over the years is what I'm saying. So if you catch my drift. So over the years, always a news item. So today I want to discuss several things. Number one, I think JP Morgan is telling people to sell. So that's kind of interesting. Exit the market. And then I wanted to bring this up too. This was kind of interesting. Police respond to reports of a shooting at a Michigan synagogue. So immediately, I have to say that I was thinking, so here's a false flag. And then I get, seriously, like my first thought was, this is a false flag. And now let me show you why. Number one, it's in Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer, she loves a good false flag. But anyway, so you've got Gretchen on the in leadership. Okay, we'll just say that. And she's a lot like my governor of Utah, completely horrible and totally liberal. But anyway, so Michigan authorities respond to reports of an active shooter at a Jewish temple outside Detroit. Okay. So immediately they refer to FBI Director Kash Patel saying that there was a vehicle ramming and an active shooter situation at the temple. Okay. And I found this kind of interesting. Here is a situation in Detroit and Kash Patel is already on the job. Okay. He's already there. He's already in the story. All right. And this should be something that Detroit would handle. Okay. But no. Kash Patel is in. So then you have Whitmer, of course, making a statement. And by the way, why was Kash Patel in on this if no one was injured or killed? That's weird. So anyway, so of course you want to hear Whitmer's comment because of course this is what's making the news, right? I quote, Michigan's Jewish community should be able to live and practice their faith in peace. End of quote. So the Jewish Federation of Detroit said its Jewish agencies are in a precautionary lockdown. Why? I mean, okay. And then the story will be updated. So first of all, you have Kash Patel, FBI, in on this, what seems to be a city or a state situation. Okay. So immediately when he's involved, I'm thinking there's something weird there. And no one was killed or injured. But of course, they have to make the statement that Jewish people are not safe. And you're going to see a lot of that because they're getting too much blowback right now. So even on the conservative side, conservative hosts are going after anyone that asks questions about Israel's government. So there you go. There you go. Anyway, so what I want to do I obviously I'm starting out with a couple of those stories, but what I really want to do, and thanks Cash Patel for always being there for the rescue and in on it and talking about it before anyone else. Okay. So the speed at which they work is amazing. And then they're always issuing themselves a job to be done by the FBI when the states warrant the job to be done. So anyway, let's talk about, I do want to talk about Iran. Now, I know you've been hearing about Iran endlessly, but I feel like I haven't done a very good job in telling you why I think they're very, very controlled. And when you realize, I think that they're very, very controlled, then you start to think of what's happening differently. And we had Lindsey Graham on the opening clip talking about, send your sons and daughters for freedom, go fight for freedom. And, as a conservatives seem to never, I shouldn't say never, but mostly they're very in favor of war because it always seems to be merited. Okay. So I'm a conservative that questions war because I think the wars that have been happening ever since the UN was instigated are primarily for reasons that we're told the exact opposite. Okay. And so ever since the UN was put in for world peace, okay, I laugh when I say that, but okay, it was in the beginning. That's what we were sold on, that we've had nothing but wars since. And even World War II, I think, was very, very, very staged. So I'm coming from a completely different perspective as a conservative. So when I'm talking, I really want to get to the heart of what's the truth going on over in Iran, because it's going to dominate the headlines for a while. So I thought that this show today is really going to shed some light on context for you. And it even involves Time Magazine. There you go. Okay, so right now, we're supposed to be afraid of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, okay? And this is the group that's going to attack the ships. This is the reason that they're going to attack ships, is what they've said, right? That's what our press is saying. So therefore, this is why Glenn Beck and all of these others are out there going, oh, it's an insurance thing. And then Trump said we need to have our troops take the ships in and out, right? So it doesn't conflict with the insurance, even though that just started, I believe, and it's not really making a dent in the price of oil. So the insurance, I don't think, is the issue. Wink, wink. But it's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that seems to be the issue, okay? Because they're the 125,000 member group, which isn't a lot, but this is the group that's going to be shooting at the ships, okay? Now, I want you to know that they were sort of instigated and formed in April of 1979 by decree. Okay. And then it was tasked with safeguarding the Islamic Republic that was formed, okay, in 1979 after Khomeini was put in. All right. So it was officially established by him as a military branch, okay, Khomeini, in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution. And this is where the Iranian army, right, they say it was a protective group, okay? But I actually think it was instigated by the CIA and trained by the CIA. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So Khomeini, if you don't know any Iran history and all you're looking at is AP and Reuters, this is so important to know. So Khomeini served as the de facto head of state, right, in February of 1979 until his appointment as supreme leader in December of that same year. So if you're wondering, yeah, the little revolutionary group, right, that's going to be shooting at the ships, right, that was formed even before he was appointed as the supreme leader. So Khomeini, what most people don't know is that he was appointed Time Magazine's Man of the Year. Man of the Year. Here we go. Man of the Year. He graced 6 covers of Time magazine, and even one of the covers was like, it's like a match of wills, or against Jimmy Carter. It's like they both are so strong and they're going after each other, and so it's kind of interesting how it's all been painted. But this is the cover, Time magazine. I mean, it's whenever you see covers on Time magazine, just know that they are 100% the deep state propaganda, because they owned Time magazine. Henry Luce and the bunch from the CFR, actually Council of Foreign Relations, actually propped up, paid for, and put out Time magazine. So anytime I see somebody on the cover, I'm like, ooh, ouch, because that's usually a propaganda hit, right? This is what Time magazine said. Rarely has so improbable a leader shaken the world. Okay. This was their guy. And I'm going to talk about how they put him in just a moment. But I want people to understand that when you're named Man of the Year for Time magazine, Hitler was named, Stalin. I mean, it's very interesting who was named Man of the Year. Okay. So he was on Khomeini was on about 6 times. Hitler was on the cover 7 times. In fact, in January of 1939, yeah, he was Man of the Year. Now, one question that I wondered about, because I kind of knew the answer going in. I already knew the answer. And then, of course, it was backed up by the answer. And the question was, what about the Holodomor, where they annihilated all of those people in Ukraine, right? These Christians. And 4 to 6 million people were just decimated. Okay. Did you know that was never on the cover of Time magazine? For anybody that's wondering? Yeah, this took place in 1932 to 1933. They did a lot of killing under Stalin. You never learned about it in school. As an adult, it's never talked about. The press has never referred to it. I've never found even a segment of tape where the press talked about the Holodomor. You should go look that up. It was never featured on Time magazine. Okay. They made Stalin Man of the Year without mentioning the Holodomor because of the fact of Stalin was denying that it even existed. That's insane, right? You think that's insane? He denied that it existed, even though 4 to 6 million people are dead. He denied it. So the press never asked a single question. Think the press is owned? Oh, yeah, the press is owned. Yeah, the press is definitely owned. Okay. So, yeah, it was pretty crazy. Now, let's talk about the 1950s for just a moment. Okay. The CIA, I shouldn't say the CIA cooed with the Shah. Okay. So, but basically took over Iran and propped up the Shah and put the Shah in. It was the establishment of the Iranian secret police known as the Savik. Okay. And in the late 1950s, with assistance from the CIA. Now, this is on record. Okay. This is not Kate conspiracy theorist. This is on record. With the assistance of the CIA, because, pretty close buddies, represented this particularly significant, troubling chapter of U.S. foreign policy. And I'm actually reading to you from the press itself, because I want you to see that this is more than a theory. This is definitely signaling that the CIA is very embedded. Okay. So this is what it said. It said this period saw the direct involvement of a senior CIA official in instructing the Iranian secret police, the Savik personnel, on how to torture people. They were doing the training. Okay. Very embedded. All right. So this is kind of like their FBI / CIA, right? The Savik. Okay. So to truly grasp what's going on here, I mean, in 1953, during Eisenhower's first year in office, the CIA executed its initial major political coup, right? Besides the brainwashing of Americans and all the testing and experimentation, which was really and takeover of the press, that was really the reason for the CIA, because that's where they were going to do a lot of their bidding. This was sort of a secondary thing, but the press makes it look like this is why they came about, the CIA, because the CIA came about were officially named the CIA in 1947. They'd been operating before that, but just under that name, CIA. Okay. So in Eisenhower's first year of office, they did Operation Ajax, and this was this political coup in Iran. And the operation was designed to overthrow Mossadegh, right? So this is who was running Iran. And they wanted to overthrow him because he had nationalized the Anglo-Iranian oil company and challenging British control over Iran's oil production. Now ask yourself this. Why does it say that the British had control over Iran if you think Iran is a rogue nation? Okay. So Iran is controlled by the British, all right, and they seem like they're going to try to separate from that control. And the U.S. perceived Mossadegh as moving into the Soviet sphere, but really we own the Soviets now too, but we didn't maybe then. And Eisenhower approved the action. The CIA operates successfully, orchestrating the Shah to be put into power and securing Iranian oil reserves. So this was very much to the delight of the CIA, and the CIA was responsible for it. Okay. Now, the MEK, which I've talked about on the show, is the Iranian political militant group, and they were supposed to oppose the Shah of Iran in 1965. So the Shah is in power, right? 53 to 65, right? He's in power still. And all of a sudden, the MEK comes up, and it's run by Maryam and Mossad. And they're both assets, CIA assets. Okay. If you go back into their history, you're going to see that. They're very much assets. In fact, Mossad got out of jail to run the MEK, okay, basically. So he made a deal and got to run it. Now, by the way, he hasn't even been seen since 2003. So Maryam is always the one that is shown or talked about, okay, in the press right now. But this MEK was kind of like the controlled opposition resistance force, okay? So definitely controlled. Now, let's talk about Khomeini. So Khomeini is living in Iraq. He's not even living in Iran. Khomeini denounces the Shah's reforms during the 1960s, okay? He is definitely brought up to be an asset for the CIA so that they can put him in. So he starts denouncing the Shah's reforms in the 1960s because the Shah, especially with women's rights and land reform for Muslim clerics, many of whom were large landowners. And so because of these remarks, it had contributed to violence and rioting, right? And he was exiled. So Khomeini was exiled. He was living in Iraq, but he starts to denounce the Shah. This is where it begins, okay? This is where the CIA had him begin his line of power. And the Iranians largely forgot about him until about 1978, okay? So Khomeini has this very shadowy past, and the 1960s rioting linked to him was financed in part by the Eastern Bloc Intelligence Services, which is basically CIA / Mossad / MI6, okay? When they say Eastern Bloc Intelligence, just know that they always move as one. They're all buddies, okay? So he was in the circle of these clerics who had ties to East German intelligence. And in 1960, Colonel Michael, I'm gonna maim his name, Golanowski. He was second in command of the Soviet counterintelligence in Poland. Well, he had defected to the West. And so his briefings exposed that all these communist agents, that he was honored by a resolution of the United States House of Representatives. And one report, declassified in the year 2000, said that Khomeini was one of Moscow's 5 sources of intelligence at the heart of the Shiite hierarchy. Boom! Did I just wake you up? Okay. This guy, all right, the East German intelligence said Ayatollah Khomeini was one of Moscow's 5 sources of intelligence at the heart of the Shiite hierarchy. I just love it when people think I'm a conspiracy theorist, yet all of this is backed up. Okay. So then there was a French journalist named Lorenz, and he reported that the Americans, having picked Khomeini to overthrow the Shah, had to get him out of Iraq, clothe him with respectability, set him up in Paris, a succession of events which could not have occurred if the leadership in France had been against it. We're always on board with France, okay? Always have been since the beginning of time. So that was actually a quote. He said, "We picked Khomeini to overthrow the Shah because we had to get him out of Iraq and clothe him with respectability and set him up in Paris." So in 1978, Khomeini, in Iraq since 1965, was permitted to reside in France, and two French police squads, along with the Algerians and the Palestinians, protected him. Yeah. So there was a small villa occupied by Khomeini. The agents of many of the world's secret services were gathered all there, right? The CIA, the MI6, the KGB, and the SDECE were all there. Don't ever think that the CIA and the KGB and the MI6 and the Mossad, which is not mentioned here, but I guarantee you, all of this is bosom buddy time. Okay, they all work together. So it's never the KGB versus the CIA. And this is why I say over and over again, I actually don't believe about the Cold War. I don't think that. I think it was cover. But because I think we're thick as thieves with the KGB. Anyway, this went on to say, because this was in the notes, okay, the two French police squads, the CIA had even rented the house next door. And according to most of the published witness statements, the East Germans were in charge of most of the radio transmissions. And on at least one occasion, 8,000 cassettes of the Ayatollah's speeches were sent directly to Tehran, okay, by diplomatic bag. So they definitely wanted him in the press. They were definitely designing his speeches. So was he an asset? Oh, gee, I think so, said Captain Obvious. So the French services quickly verified that Libya, Iraq, and Russia were providing money. Young Iranian members of the Communist Party made up Khomeini's secretariat in France, working in cooperation with the French Communist Party. They provided couriers to pass his orders and tapes into Iran to make sure that they got seen and heard, to build him up, right? Put him in France and then build him up with respectability so that he's listened to, okay? And then, I don't know, devise an Iranian revolutionary group to basically then become his armed forces, okay? So, is it controlled? I would think so. So he gave Khomeini 132 interviews in 112 days. Why do you think that happened? Because the media is owned all around the world. That's why. So he was receiving really easy questions. All the media became his sounding board. Time Magazine made him Man of the Year. In fact, Iran being the voice of America, the voice of Israel, and especially the BBC virtually became the voice of the revolution, moving from criticism to overt incitement of revolt, and from biased reporting to outright disinformation. And that's a quote. Okay. So two major events happened in 1978, right? And they propelled the revolution, very controlled revolution in Iran. On the afternoon of August 19, 1978, a deliberate fire gutted the Rex Cinema, okay, in Abadan, killing almost 500 people, including many children with their mothers. Do you guys remember that school that was? Okay, never mind. Blocked exits prevented this escape, and the police learned that the fire was caused by Khomeini supporters who fled to Iraq, where the Ayatollah was in exile. But the international press blamed the fire on the Shah and the Savik. Remember the secret police? Okay, that the CIA trained? Okay. So the press blames the fire on the Shah, all right? And furthermore, the mass murder had been timed to coincide with the Shah's already planned celebration of his mother's birthday. So the press we're told to report that the royal family danced while this had happened, killing almost 500 people, okay? So, communist inspired rioting swept Iran, and foreigners, including Palestinians, appeared in the crowds. Gee, I wonder why. Hmm. Although the media depicted all these demonstrations as spontaneous uprisings, you and I know the truth, right? This happens all the time. CIA's whiz at this kind of stuff. These professional revolutionaries organized them. And some Iranian students were caught up in it. And then, of course, the Shah's generosity backfired. So this was pointed out by a gentleman, the Du Barrier. Okay. So, in his desperate need of men capable of handling the sophisticated equipment he was bringing in, the Shah had sent over 100,000 students abroad. Those educated in France and America returned indoctrinated by leftist professors and eager to serve as links between comrades abroad and the Communist Party at home. All right. So, when the demonstrations turned violent, then the government invoked martial law. The second thing that happened was September 8th, and thousands of demonstrators gathered in Tehran. They were ordered to disperse by an army unit. Okay, gunmen, many on the rooftops, fired at the soldiers, and the Shah's army fired back. So the rooftop snipers then sprayed the crowd, and when the tragedy was over, 121 demonstrators and 70 soldiers and police were dead. The autopsies revealed that most in the crowd had been killed by ammo non-regulation for the army. But the Western press claimed that the Shah had massacred his own people. This is why you never trust Reuters and the AP News in giving us our foreign press. Okay, so the Shah, extremely grieved by this incident, wanting no further bloodshed, gave orders tightly restricting the military. But that proved a mistake because until now, the sight of these elite troops had quieted these mobs. Well, the new restraints emboldened revolutionaries who brazenly insulted soldiers, knowing they could fire only as a last resort. So he limited the military from any action, and they knew that he was doing that, and it kind of backfired on him. So when you look at Iran, okay, the world's oldest empire, dating back to 2,500 years. By 1900, it was floundering, and bandits had dominated it, and literacy was 1%, and women obviously had no rights there. And then the Shah had changed a lot of that, but then the press was told to report on him extremely negatively. I don't know if you guys remember his press tour over here I think it was like the mid 1970s, right? Where a lot of people had kind of wondered, they saw a very tired Shah, and then they saw a Shah that looked really refreshed and kind of different. Same thing that goes on today, where you're kind of like, that person looks a lot different, but no one really knew except Peter Better, who was reporting at the time, all of these like secret documents and things like that, actually had a lot to say about the Shah and didn't believe the Shah was actually the Shah. Felt like it was an imposter Shah. But anyway, that he had already been taken out. But the Shah had changed a lot of things, and he was using oil-generated wealth, and he had modernized the nation. He had built rural roads, post offices, libraries, and things like that. And he was making people, 90% self-sufficient in food production, which was good at the time. And he established he established colleges, I can't talk today, you guys, colleges and universities at his own expense. There was a lot of things that he had done. And he had also donated 500,000 crown acres to 25,000 farmers. And they went from making about $160 a year to like on average about $2,500 a year, which was, pretty substantial. In the 1950s over here, we were making about $3,000 a year on average. So this was 20 years later, they were making about 2,500 a year. But before that, my gosh, it was very slim pickings over in Iran. Also, they had applied to host the 1988 Olympics, and that was important too. So they were regarded as a U.S. ally. and the Shah was pro-Western and anti-communist, you're probably thinking along the same lines. Iraq, Saddam Hussein, he was considered an ally for a long time too, by the way. It's kind of interesting how they do this, but build them up, take them out. Okay, so anyway, the CIA, but he was aware that he had posed a main barrier to Soviet ambitions in the Middle East. And so the analyst, Duberry, had noticed that he determined to make Iran capable of blocking a Russian advance until the West would realize to what extent her own interests were threatened and come to his aid. So it necessitated an army of 250,000 men, and the Shah's Air Force ranked among the world's 5 best. This was a voice of stability within the Middle East itself, and he favored peace with Israel and supplied the state with oil. So on the home front, the Shah looked as though he was kind of protecting minorities and permitting non-Muslims to practice their faiths. He said all faith imposes respect upon the beholder. And then the Shah was also brought Iran into the 20th century by granting women equal rights. Okay. So then the Shah suddenly became a target of this campaign led by our CIA and the British foreign policymakers. And it was bolstered through slander through our press and our foreign press. And along with this sort of like Soviet-inspired communistic insurgents, okay, and mullahs opposing the Shah's progressiveness, and combined to face him with overwhelming opposition. So in 3 years, he went from monarch to exile, right, on January 16th, 1979. Isn't it kind of amazing that they formed that Iranian Revolutionary Guard group in January 1979? Interesting. Okay. And then we installed Khomeini. So there's a book also called The Last Shah of Iran. And in that book, it said, and I quote, "We now know the idea of deposing the Shah was broached continuously from the mid-70s on in the National Security Council in Washington by Henry Kissinger, whom the Shah thought of as a firm friend." Yeah, the Kissinger's no one's friend. Kissinger's horrifying evil. But anyway, Kissinger, this man that no one elected, but got appointed to run our foreign policy for decades upon decades upon decades, little 3'2" Kissinger. Okay, so he, basically with the American establishment, before acting as Secretary of State under Nixon at the time and Gerald Ford, he had been Chief Foreign Affairs Advisor to, of course, Rockefeller. And I love that my friend Mike said this is Rockefeller land. Yes, it is. It is Rockefeller land for sure in America. But he called the single most influential person in his life was Rockefeller, right? Was Kissinger, okay? But that's Rockefeller speaking of Kissinger, saying he was the most influential. So Jimmy Carter defeats Ford in 1976 presidential election, and then the switch to a Democratic administration didn't change the new foreign policy tilt toward the Shah. Every presidential administration since Roosevelt had been dominated by members of the Council of Foreign Relations. And so the most visible manifestation of this establishment had dictated that U.S. foreign policy, this was going along international lines, the Carter administration, no exception. And basically, the process of toppling the Shah had been initiated in 1974. Okay, under Nixon, and then numerous documents and studies bear witness to the fact that if it was not until the beginning of the Carter administration that the decision was made to take concerted action by invoking problems related to human rights. It's always related to human rights, right? Because that's how they sell us on it. So the Shah's destruction required assembling a team of diplomatic hitmen. And when the situation was deemed ripe, U.S. Ambassador William Sullivan, the man reputed to have toppled, Laos, the leader there, was sent to urge the Shah to get out. And of course, he was an instant authority. Mr. George Ball, an instant authority on Iran, was sent to follow up with the same message. Then Sullivan from the Council on Foreign Relations, a career diplomat with no Middle East experience whatsoever, became the ambassador to Iran in 1977. And the Shah, this is what the Shah said about Sullivan, the CFR appointed guy in charge. He said, whenever I met Sullivan and asked him to confirm these official statements of American support, he promised he would. But then a day or two later, this is how they operate. This is why I want to tell you this. A day or two later, he would return, gravely shake his head, and say that he had received no instructions and therefore could not comment. And his answer was always the same. And he said, I have received no instructions. This rote answer had been given me since early September 1978, and I would continue to hear it until the day I left the country. This is how they operate. They operate in subtle ways, in very distinct ways, especially in these cases, right? And there's always a plausible deniability, I have found, right? They do this in media too. I'm a member of media, and they do this in media as well. There's always plausible deniability with the action, however it's carried out. It's very weird, but they're able to do it. So George Ball, he was a CFR member, Bilderberger. He was a banker with Lehman. And the Shah commented, what was I to make, for example, of the administration's sudden decision to call former Undersecretary of State George Ball to the White House as an advisor on Iran? He's like, I knew that he wasn't a friend. And so it got kind of tension-filled, should we say, because George Ball had a lot of, he was coming from the CIA and the CFR. He was basically put there for a reason, and the Shah knew it. So the Shah had already voiced a lot of these opinions about Ball, like, why in the world are you giving me this guy, right? And then there was the venom of Teddy Kennedy ranting against the Shah in 1977, and the Kennedy family financed this so-called committee for the defense of liberties and rights of man in Tehran, which was nothing but a headquarters for revolution. You know, the Kennedys always placed themselves in history and not so in a very good way a lot of the time. So suddenly the Shah said the US media found him to be an oppressor and a tyrant. Now, Assad would tell you the same thing. Libya would say the same thing. Saddam Hussein would say the same thing, right? It was they build you up and then they call you a tyrant and an oppressor. So at the center of this human rights was, of course, Shah's security force, the SOVIC, which had been trained by the CIA, remember? So comparable to its mission, like to America's FBI, the SOVIC was engaged in this struggle against terrorism, right? Most of which was fueled by USSR, which linked to Iran's internal communist party, the Tudeh. Anyway, the SOVIC, which had only about 4,000 people in it, that was trained by the CIA in 1978, said that they saved many lives by averting several bombing attempts. Do you think those were controlled? Do you think those were put in? Of course they were. So its prisons were open for Red Cross inspections. Remember how I talked about Red Cross a long time ago, and we talked about the Red Lost and how much money goes into Red Cross and the funneling of money in emergencies and how just suspect Red Cross is. Anyway, it's kind of like United Way. Both are very suspect. They're involved in a lot of things. But anyways, these guys were open to Red Cross inspections, and they had these unsuccessful attempts were made on the Shah's life, and he always pardoned the would-be assassins. Very crazy. Anyway, there was a massive campaign deployed against him, courtesy of the CIA and the media. And within Iran, they had all these Islamic fundamentalists who resented the Shah's progressive pro-Western views. And then it was combined with the Soviet communists to overthrow the Shah. So the tandem was odd because communism is committed to destroying all religion, which Marx called the opiate of the masses. The Shah understood that Islamic Marxism was an oxymoron because he said, of course, the two concepts are are not compatible unless those who profess Islam do not understand their own religion or pervert it for their own political ends. Interesting, right? Islamic Marxism. So for the Western cameras, for our news cameras, protesters in Tehran carried empty coffins and coffins seized from genuine funerals, proclaiming these were victims of Savik, right? But this was a deception. It was later admitted by the revolutionaries, kind of like the white hats in Syria. This was necessary because it had no actual martyrs to parade. So it was another tactic that they used, that the CIA used. Demonstrators splashed themselves with things and bloodied themselves, right? And then, of course, our media totally cooperated, right? So when Carter visited Iran at the end of 77, the bought and sold press reported that his departure to Tehran International Airport had been thoroughly through empty streets because the city was all locked up and emptied of people by order of Savik. What the media didn't mention was that Carter actually chose to leave at 6 a.m. when the streets were naturally empty, just like they would be here in America. You got to love the press and you got to love how coordinated these efforts are. So then they had a campaign against the Shah and his wife. They came for a state visit in America, 1977 in November. And while touring this is so interesting. While touring they were touring Virginia, Williamsburg, and about 500 Iranian students showed up, right? And they were applauding. 500 students, okay? However, about 50 protesters waved these hammer and sickle red flags, okay? These unlikely Iranians were masked, of course, okay? Unable to speak Persian. You're kind of thinking Antifa right now, right? In these different groups, okay? How they are all usually masked up, okay? And some were blonde. The US media focused exclusively on the protesters. So this is what the Shah wrote. He said, "Imagine my amazement the next day when I saw the press had reversed the numbers and wrote that the 50 Shah supporters were lost in a hostile crowd." So it was 500 supporters, but they said it was only 50, and they just reversed the numbers. They do this with pro-life marches. They do this with anything they want to bury, and they invert the numbers. Isn't that insane? So he was noticing this. He was speaking out about it. And but this is how the CIA works in combination with the media, as the Pentagon gives the news cycle to the media and as the press is owned. The Washington Post, the New York Times, they're all owned. And so here they are reporting all this crap. And the Shah was just merely pointing out that they were lying. And then several thousand Iranian students surrounded the White House with a huge banner, "Welcome Shah." But the police kept them as far away as possible, but then allowed a small number of opponents to come up to the railing at the White House. And so right close to where the helicopter was going to land for the official welcome, what do you think got reported? It's insanity, you guys. It's so insane how they do it. But for us to understand, yeah, prostitutes, I love that comment. Look, for us to kind of understand what we're up against with this, it's a combination of the CIA, all the little moves they make to start a demonization process. And then they do it successfully because the press is owned. And this is why even on the right and the left, press is completely owned. And you find yourself brainwashed into thinking a certain way about this people. They knew that the Khomeini was hell-bent on being very tyrannical, and they wanted him to be tyrannical. So I'm not saying that Iran wasn't tyrannical. All I'm saying is that he was put in to be that. It was manufactured to be that, right? To have that outcome in Iran. So yeah, so I could go on and on about all the different little things they were doing, but they did many, many things that, this is what the Shah said when he left Iran. He said, "You cannot imagine the pressure the Americans were putting on me. And in the end, it became an order. How could I stay when the Americans had sent a general, Heiser, to force me out? How could I stand alone against the State Department director for Iran and the entire State Department?" And he's not wrong, right? So he finally accepted exile, and then he was clinging to the belief that America was still Iran's ally. And then, of course, that was an illusion for sure. So A lot of this is coming from a piece that the New American did on this. And I encourage you to go read it, Iran and the Shah. There's so much here as far as U.S. Ambassador William Sullivan from the CFR assured the Shah that if he exited Iran, America would welcome him. Well, he ended up dead shortly after this. And I think that was murder, by the way. So there's that. But look at how much control we had. Look at how much control Britain had over Iran. And they admit it, but it's very subtle. And you have to look for those little subtle things to kind of tell you who's in charge. Khomeini had taken power not by a constitutional process, but a violent revolution that was spearheaded by the CIA that ultimately claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, right? And so his opponents were then executed without due process, brutally tortured, because that's what the CIA had trained these people to do. And then Tehran's police officers loyal to the Shah were slaughtered. And all of these things started happening. Now, our press was busy putting him on the cover of Time magazine as he was doing all of this. What does that tell you? So then you have Ted Kennedy, Carter, and all of the bought and sold mainstream media talking about Shah's alleged human rights violations and said nothing about what Khomeini was doing. Do you think that was by design? Of course it was. Remember when the CIA put him up in France and then made the press carry all those stupid articles he wrote? Yeah, it was all manufactured. And so the media would say, the Shah actually got very angry and voiced a comment and said, "Where are the defenders of human rights and democracy now?" Not a word of protest from American human rights advocates who had been so vocal in denouncing my tyrannical regime. It was a sad commentary. I reflected that the United States and indeed most Western countries had adopted a double standard for international morality. Anything Marxist, no matter how bloody and base, is acceptable. Wow. That's insane. This is insane. Then the Shah was lured to Mexico. Okay. He stayed in Egypt and Morocco, but then he didn't want to impose risks on their countries, right, from Muslim extremists. So eventually he welcomed the Mexican president's hospitality and went down there, received an invitation from CFR chairman David Rockefeller to go to Mexico. So the Shah goes to Mexico, and basically the Shah feels like, oh, this guy is going to be on my side. He goes to America for medical treatment, right? And Rockefeller sends this MD that he knows. I feel like we should play music like dun, 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 right? To examine the Shah against his better judgment, to abandon his personal physicians and fly to New York for treatment. He was received at the Rockefeller-founded Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital for cancer treatment that he suddenly got. Remember cancer? Remember how they were handing that out, the CIA, and giving rapid cancer to people? I keep thinking the JFK assassination. Yeah, Anyways, okay. So then the Shah experienced a fateful delay in spleen surgery that some believe accelerated his death under the care of David Rockefeller, MD. So yeah, there was a lot of things happening and going on that people just didn't even notice at the time, didn't even talk about because the media didn't talk about it. And people were far less suspicious of the media back then. So the Shah's admission to the United States had another outcome, and that was, of course, partly in retribution. In November 4th, 1979, Iranians took 52 hostages from the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, right? And this is all under Khomeini. And the Soviet special services assisted them. And this embarrassed Jimmy Carter, who had done much to destroy the Shah and support Khomeini. And of course, the seizure made the Shah a pawn. So while in New York, Mexico reverses its welcome, informing the Shah that his return would contravene Mexico's interests. So you can only guess that, who possibly could have given him that view and influenced that decision. And then Carter faced this dilemma. Iran wanted the Shah's return for a degrading execution in exchange for the American hostages. And however, this trade would humiliate the United States. So then Panama was selected as an kind of like the intermediary. And following treatment in New York, the Shah was informed that he could no longer remain in America, but Panama would welcome him. And in Panama, however, the Shah and the Empress were under virtual house arrest. And it was apparent that it would be only a matter of time before the Shah would be sent to Iran in exchange for the hostages. And so a special cage was erected in Tehran. And so the Khomeini's followers wanted to parade him around the streets. You're thinking about Gaddafi right now? Before the final torture and bloody execution. But then Anwar Sadat, the Egyptian president and the Shah's friend, realized the scheme and then sent a jet to Panama, which escorted the Shah and the Empress safely to Egypt. And then, of course, he died in 1980, and his last words were this, the Shah: "I will upon fate, never ceasing to pray for Iran and my people. I think only of their suffering." And in Cairo, he had a funeral that honored him, and 3 million Egyptians followed the procession. And then Anwar Sadat, who, like the Shah, advocated a peaceful Middle East, defied the American establishment by saving the Shah from his infamous death, right? Just like Gaddafi got. Did not survive much longer himself. The following year, Muslim extremists, I'm going to put that in air quotes, because this was intelligence, assassinated him under circumstances remaining still to this day very controversial. That's Anwar Sadat. And so I don't know how much more evidence people need, but Iran ranks second in the world in oil and gas reserves. Okay. And energy is pretty critical to world domination, right? And major oil companies, Exxon, British Petroleum, right, obviously have a lot of pull. But the major oil companies for years dictated Iranian oil commerce. But the Shah had actually explained that in 1973, so this is important, right? That to know everything in context, right? In 1973, we succeeded in putting a stop of 60 years of foreign exploitation on Iranian oil sources. In 1974, Iran at last took over the management of the entire oil industry. This is the Shah talking, including the refineries at Abadan, right? Abadan, and so on. And I'm quite convinced that it was from this moment that some very powerful international interest identified within Iran these elements which they could use to get me my downfall. So then they had this big attitude shift from Henry Kissinger. And then the plan was hatched in 1974, that same year, because, Kissinger's links to the Rockefellers, right? And I could go on and on with all these links between the club. But then, this was very, very important. The Shah had also maintained a neutral stance toward Israel during the 1973 Yom Kippur War, and he allowed critical supplies to reach Egypt, enabling it to achieve this balance of success and earning Sadat's undying gratitude, right? But a wrath from the Zionists, and the Zionists are the Jewish ones that lie about being Jewish, okay, that even the Jewish should be compelled to talk about because they're using the Jewish people. So this impacted in the West, our attitude and change in the mid-70s. And this is why they did this powerful campaign to then take the Shah out and eventually murder him, and then also put Khomeini in, fully knowing what they were doing. So don't also overlook that the Shah opposed the opium trade. Now, when you think of Afghanistan, you think of poppy fields, right? You think of heroin, you think of the drug trade. This was flourishing in the Middle East. People did not know this was going on generally. We do now, but people that back then did not. And he opposed it. And so there was a lot more there. Don't you agree that we basically don't hear any of this in our conversations, do we? So I do find this fascinating, and I find it fascinating because of the fact that it's not talked about, but also because we are things are just the same over and over and over again. And when I was making reference to Iraq, and I was referencing Libya and Gaddafi, and by the way, the people in Libya liked Gaddafi. When I talk about this, they use the same game. So why can't people see it? Why can't we see that the CIA is squarely in charge? Why can't we see it in our own country? Right? Why can't we see it here? It's like that old joke, the two guys on the airplane talking about propaganda. One's from communist Russia and one's from America. And the American says, I feel so bad for you that you have propaganda. And the Russian laughs and, like, you don't realize you do, like how stupid are you, And it's so true. It's so true. I'll tell you what, I bring this to your attention for you to realize how co-opted this is. Please share this with people so they understand in context Iran, and that we manipulate the things that happen in Iran right now. Their leader just came out, right? Their leader, and the newly appointed leader. And this is what Reuters is saying that he's saying, by the way. And I'm not saying he's a good guy. Don't get me wrong. Not saying he's a good guy. I'm saying that it's just all these steps are just very manipulated. The Khomeini was manipulated to take over Iran and also be very tyrannical. So don't think for a second that I'm saying that what they've done in Iran is good. What I'm saying is that we believe our press, right? We believe our press. So this is what was going on today.
Getting this in right now on Iranian state media, a presenter read a new statement from Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, and Reuters is reporting a few highlights from those remarks, saying that the supreme leader said in the statement, we believe in friendship with neighbors and only target the bases, and we will inevitably continue. That is not true. We know that many Gulf countries have had their residential and civilian infrastructure attacked. Now, Iran's new supreme leader in this statement goes on to say all U.S. bases should immediately be closed in the region, and those bases will be attacked. He also says in the statement, again, that was presented on state media, he does not appear in the statement, that he calls on unity among the people of Iran and participation in Quds Day. Now, Quds is the Arabic word for Jerusalem, and this day normally falls on the last Friday of Ramadan. And so if my math is correct here, that would be March 20th of this year, the last Friday of Ramadan, when traditionally we have seen Iranian proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah launch attacks and also large demonstrations in the region. And so this is certainly something to look out for in the days ahead.
Oh, but again, when I heard that, this is something to look out for in the days ahead. It's like they're prepping us for false flags for March 20th, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, here we go. Here's
but again, this is the first statement that we are receiving from Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. He speaks about the attacks on Gulf countries, also says that he will target U.S. bases in the region, and then also talks about the Strait of Hormuz. This is an interesting part here. And again, we are just getting these highlights from Reuters, watching state media in Iran. They're first coming out, of course, in Farsi. And Iran's new supreme leader goes on to say the closure of the Strait of Hormuz should be continued as a tool to, quote, pressure the enemy. And so the rhetoric that we are hearing from Iran's new supreme leader is quite similar to his father's rhetoric. Remember, Iran's former supreme leader was taken out in the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury when this war began. And in those opening strikes, Mojtaba Khamenei's wife, mother, and one son were also killed. Again, the latest remarks, though, that we are getting from the supreme leader via state media, and we are quoting Reuters here, indicate that he will continue ordering the attacks on U.S. bases in the region and continue efforts to close the Strait of Hormuz.
All righty.
Good morning. We're just getting...
So, prepping us, telling us how to feel, telling us what to think. That's our media. So that you walk away with a very clear idea. about what we're supposed to be. Like Angel says, be afraid, be very afraid. Yes, right? When I would suspect that the intelligence agencies are banding together to provoke some attacks. So, we spend almost $1 trillion on military, right? So, yeah, 2.7 trillion. Spend 2.7. So we spend almost $1 trillion. There's 2.7 billion spent entirely around the world. Okay. We spend almost $1 trillion. No one matches us. No one even comes close. No one's even in the same ballpark. Yeah. Russia's at 149 billion. Yep. South Korea, half a trillion. But we're at almost $1 trillion. Okay. And none of the countries even come close. Iran doesn't even register on the list. But the press is acting as if this is a real war going on. So I do have a lot of questions about that. We're acting as if they can wipe us off the face of the earth, and that's not true, actually. They don't have what it takes to do that. So it's going to be interesting to see how long this happens and the false flags that come out of it. Because I do think there are false flags that come out of it. I really do. Sickening. It's really sickening. But there you have it. 1 billion a day. Yeah. Interesting. We're the biggest. We're the biggest by far. So we outmatch everybody. Look, so when we act like everyone's going to come get us, and so we have to do all these things, that's a lie. So I don't know how you could see it any other way. I mean, we're not getting attacked. Even 9/11 was a false flag. So we're not getting attacked. Why? Because we do spend more. We do have more. We can annihilate anybody off the face of the earth. So, okay. All right. I mean, it's true. So when we act like we're under siege or somebody's going to come get us in the press, the only thing we lose is liberty. That's it. So maybe we should kind of check, feelings and thoughts of tribes at the door and maybe look at it in a different light so that we can kind of understand what's been going on, because we seem to retreat to tribes really easily. And I really hate it. I really hate it. And more damned lies. Yes, indeed. More damned lies. So it's the truth. I so appreciate you tuning in. Here I am drinking this today because I need the energy today. And also it keeps me helping me lose weight, which is amazing. But I was reviewing a clip from Dr. Lodi. And he's a really great doctor. And he was talking about how vitamin C needs a special delivery so that you're not just absorbing it. A lot of people do absorbic acid, which is terrible for you. But real vitamin C, okay, liposomal vitamin C is good for you. Although when you're digesting it, it's just you're not, how much should you get? You're really not getting enough. But in this form, which is Cardio Miracle, it's amazing. You're getting the vitamin C. I'm getting the vitamin C, which helps me to feel really good this winter-ish, leaping into spring soon. So I just wanted to share with you that I drink it in the morning and then I drink it throughout the day. And he even said that we should be kind of sipping it during the day because that constant delivery and flow to our body, which I thought was kind of amazing because I already do that and it makes me feel really good. Go to cardiomiracle.com/Kate. It's 20 times the vegetables and fruits of any product out there. It is amazing. And the vitamin C delivery is clearly amazing, and the vitamin D delivery. So there's just so many good benefits to this. And the nitric oxide in your system is amazing too. It's how I'm getting through this right now. And go to cardiomiracle.com/Kate. Try it out. You're going to love it. But do 2 doses a day. Also, the ebook, go get the cancer ebook, please. Please fight cancer without chemo, please. There's so many ways to do it, and people are succeeding at this. I have a good friend of mine. She's literally succeeding at beating cancer with no chemo. And I have to be kind of careful with the words I choose because YouTube hates it if you talk about health stuff. So go to katetalks.myshopify.com and go get the $10 book because it's worth it. It's worth $10 to know what to do when there's a sea of different products and herbs and everybody talks about all these different things as the lifesaver. Well, there's more to the story than that. And it's the combination of things you do and for what kind. And those things are important. Go get this vital information. And I've compiled this for you. And it's taken years to do it and lots of interviews with doctors to do it. Good doctors that know about health, not the cabal. And this is the way that you can help. I'll say help with cancer. Okay. Help to defy it. Let's say that. This is the way. And I give you very, very, very good info in this that you're going to want to store in your computer because we're all affected by it. Now in our lifetime, 1 in 2 gets cancer. That's how sick we are. That's how sick we are. So, all right. And I really do appreciate you. Ron Paul will be on the show, not this week, but next. And of course, next week, I've got some really great guests lined up as well. So you'll have to tune in to find out. Anyway, really appreciate you. Even you people that comment on YouTube that are kind of horrid, and some of them are horrid and some of them are wonderful. So appreciate you guys. Thanks, LB. Thanks, Angel. And of course, all these other comments by all these other woke little bots. Really, it's okay. You can just type away. Just type away. It's fine. I don't care. Anyway, I just think it's hilarious. YouTube is just full of little body people. Anyways, you guys are the best. Get over to the website, katedalleyradio.com, katedalleyradio.com. Be faithful, be fearless. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your families. Get out into sunshine if you're around some sunshine. Man, we need to take care of ourselves. Find joy. Even with all this going on, but at least understand it. So please send this to a friend and share this with everybody you know. Really appreciate that. Thanks, you guys. I'll see you on Tuesday.